Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to explore the fascinating world of grid references. This is Unit 1 of our Advanced Geography course, Lesson 2. It's part of Grade 5 Social Studies. In this presentation, we'll learn how to use grid references to locate places on maps accurately. So, let's get started and discover how these skills help us understand the world better. Let's talk about what grid references are. Essentially, they are a way to find exact locations on a map quickly and easily. Think of them like a special address system for maps, helping us pinpoint exactly where something is. This is especially useful when we're dealing with smaller areas like cities, towns, or neighborhoods. Maps that use grid references have a pattern made up of numbered lines. These create a grid. There are horizontal lines called Eastings and vertical lines known as Northings. By combining these, we get 4-digit codes that help us locate specific places precisely. Now, think about it. Have you ever used coordinates to find a location in a game, or maybe on a treasure map? That's the same basic idea. Here's an example of a grid reference. It allows us to identify a spot on the map by following these grid lines and numbers, making navigation straightforward. So, in summary, grid references are a simple yet powerful tool for map reading, especially in smaller areas. Let's take a closer look at some key vocabulary for understanding map grid references. First up is the 4-figure grid reference. This system uses 4 numbers to pinpoint a specific square on a map grid. The first 2 numbers indicate the easting, which tells us how far east a location is, and the last 2 numbers represent the northing, showing how far north it is. Now, moving on to easting. These are the numbers along the bottom or top of the grid, and they increase as you move east, from left to right. Think of them as how far you've traveled eastward from a starting point. Next is northing. These are the numbers along the sides of the grid, and they increase as you go north, from bottom to top. They tell you how far north a place is on the map. And a helpful reminder is to remember the phrase, Eastings first, then northings. It's like following a set of directions, first across the corridor, then up the stairs. This order is crucial when reading grid references accurately. So, understanding these key points helps us locate places precisely on a map, which is fundamental in navigation and geography. Now, let's take a closer look at grid references and how they compare to latitude and longitude. When we talk about feature locations, 4-figure grid references are used for smaller areas like cities, towns, or neighborhoods. They give us a quick way to pinpoint a location on a detailed map. On the other hand, latitude and longitude are used for the entire world. They help us locate places on a global scale, such as countries or continents. In terms of format, 4-figure grid references are just 4 numbers, like 102, which makes them simple and straightforward. Latitude and longitude, however, are expressed in degrees, minutes, and seconds, like 51 degrees 30 N, 0 degrees 7 W, adding more detail and complexity. When it comes to lines on maps, 4-figure grid references use eastings and northings, essentially a grid system of lines. Latitude and longitude use parallels and meridians, those imaginary lines that circle the globe. In terms of complexity, 4-figure grid references are quite simple to use, especially for detailed local mapping. Latitude and longitude are more complex, but they provide a universal system that works worldwide. For example, if you're trying to find a school on a city map, you'd likely use a 4-figure grid reference because it's quick and precise for small areas. But if you're locating a country on a world map, latitude and longitude are the tools you need. And an important point to remember, don't confuse 4-figure grid references with latitude and longitude. They are different systems, each suited for different purposes. Understanding these differences helps us choose the right method depending on whether we're working locally or globally. Imagine you've just moved to a new city and you're trying to find your way around. You don't know where anything is yet, so your neighbor kindly gives you a map to help you out. On this map, you'll see important places like schools, hospitals, shopping malls, parks, libraries, and even restaurants. Now, what makes this map really useful are the grid lines along the edges, with numbers that help you pinpoint exact locations. On the back of the map, there's a list of these places, each with a 4-digit number next to it. These numbers are called grid references, and they tell you exactly where each place is on the map. Think of it like a coordinate system, just like in math or navigation. These grid references help you find places quickly and accurately. And if you look at the map key, you'll see the symbols for each type of place. H for hospital, S for school, P for park, L for library, M for mall, and R for restaurant. So, by matching the grid reference with the map's grid and using the symbols, you can easily locate any important spot in your new city. This example really illustrates how grid references are essential. They help us find things efficiently, especially when we're new somewhere. Now, let's talk about the grid system. The grid system divides a map into squares using numbered lines. These lines create a pattern similar to a checkerboard, which makes it much easier to locate specific areas on the map. There are two main types of lines in the grid system. First, we have the horizontal lines, which have numbers at the bottom or top. These are called Eastings. Then there are the vertical lines, which have numbers on the left or right side. These are called Northings. An important point to remember is that the numbers on these lines never go above 2 digits, so they range from 0 to 99. If the map is large and the grid continues beyond 99, the numbering resets back to 0, then 1, 2, and so on. Did you know that grid systems are used by hikers, emergency services, and the military? They rely on this system to quickly pinpoint exact locations, which can be crucial in many situations. Now, thinking about the overall theme of our presentation, why do you think using a grid system makes it easier to find places on a map? Let's look at Eastings and Northings. First, we'll start with Eastings. These are the numbers you find at the bottom or sometimes at the top of the grid. They increase as you move east, which means from left to right across the map. When you're reading these, always read from left to right. Think of Eastings as the first 2 numbers in a 4-figure grid reference. Now, moving on to Northings. These are the numbers you see on the left or right side of the grid. They increase as you go north, which is from bottom to top. Again, always read from bottom to top. Think of Northings as the last 2 numbers in your grid reference. Remember, the key thing is to always read Eastings first, then Northings. It's like saying, along the corridor, then up the stairs. Now, as an activity, I want you to point out where you'd find the Eastings and Northings on a map. This will help you get familiar with how these grid references work in real map reading. All right, let's walk through finding grid references, specifically steps 1 and 2. First, we need to identify the very important corner, or VIC. To do this, locate the bottom left corner of the grid square where your place of interest is situated. This corner is what we call the VIC, and it's a crucial starting point for pinpointing both the Eastings and Northings. Once you found the VIC, the next step is to determine the Eastings figure. To do this, move your finger along the Eastings numbers. Those are the numbers at the bottom of the grid, toward the right. Stop when you reach the number directly under the VIC. That number is your Easting figure. Remember the key idea here. Along the corridor, meaning you move horizontally first, along the bottom row. For example, if you're working through an example, the Easting figure would be 1. This process helps you get a precise reference point on the grid, which is essential for accurate navigation or location finding. So always start by finding the VIC, then move horizontally to determine your Easting. Now let's look at how to find grid references, focusing on steps 3 and 4. First, determine the Northing figure. To do this, move your finger along the Northings, which are the numbers on the side of the map, until it lines up with the VIC. The number you land on is your Northing figure. Remember the phrase, then up the stairs. That means you move vertically second when locating your grid reference. Next, we combine the numbers. Take your Easting and Northing figures and put them together to form a 4-figure grid reference. Always write the Easting first, followed by the Northing. For example, if your Easting is 1 and your Northing is 2, then your grid reference is 102. It's really important to always write the Easting first, then the Northing, to keep everything consistent. So, in summary, find the Easting, find the northing, and then put those numbers together to get your final grid reference. Let's practice. If the easting is 23 and the northing is 45, what would the four-figure grid reference be? That's right, 2345. Keep practicing this, and it will become second nature. Remember, eastings first, then northings. A helpful tip to keep this straight is to imagine the grid as a two-story house. When you're finding a four-figure grid reference, think of it this way. Step 1, you can only enter the house through the ground floor and walk along the corridor, which represents the eastings. Then, step 2, you go upstairs to the upper floor, which stands for the northings. It's important to remember, you can't do it the other way around, always eastings first, then northings. Now let's do a quick check. If you see a grid reference like 2547, which numbers are eastings and which are northings? Well, the first two digits, 25, are the eastings, and the last two, 47, are the northings. This method makes it easy to identify the correct order. So just picture the house, ground floor for eastings, upper floor for northings. Always follow that sequence, along the corridor first, then up the stairs. This way, you'll consistently get the right grid reference every time. All right, now it's time for some practice. For this activity, you'll look at the map and find the four-figure grid reference for each of these places: the hotel, the park, the hospital, the school, and the library. Remember, when you're writing down the grid reference, always start with the eastings first, then the northings. That's a key point to keep in mind. As you work through it, write your answers in the spaces provided. For example, the hotel might have a grid reference like this: first the eastings, then the northings. And don't forget, the map key is there to help you. The H stands for hotel, P for park, plus sign for hospital, S for school, and L for library. Here's a fun part. Try working with a partner to find all the grid references together. It's a great way to check your work and learn from each other. Remember, mastering how to find these references helps you understand map navigation better, which ties into the bigger picture of how we use maps in daily life. So take your time, double-check your answers, and have fun with the activity. All right, it's time for a quick quiz to see how much we've learned about grid references. Let's go through each question together. First up, what does a four-figure grid reference help you do? Is it a navigate the world, B, locate on small maps, C, identify weather, or D, measure distances? Think about the purpose of grid references. They're mainly used for pinpointing locations on maps, especially small ones, so the answer is B. Next question, which numbers represent the easting figure? Is it A, the first two numbers, B, the last two numbers, C, all four numbers, or D, the middle numbers? Remember, eastings tell us how far east we are from the grid's origin, and in a four-figure reference, that's the first two digits. Moving on, what is the first step in finding a grid reference? Should you find northing, B, locate the VIC, C, find easting, or D, count squares? The first step is usually to locate the easting first, as it helps us identify the vertical grid line. Now, in the grid reference 2547, which numbers are the northings? Is it A, 25, B, 47, C, 27, or D, 54? Northings in this case are the second set of numbers, so that's 47. Finally, what is the grid reference for the school on this map? Is it A, 2352, B, 5223, C, 2253, or D, 5322? To find that, you'd look at the grid lines and match the location precisely. But for now, remember that the correct answer is the one that corresponds to the school's position. Remember, answering all these questions correctly shows you're becoming a true grid reference expert.